Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode here in the series. My name is Dominic, and I'm the host of the Android Factory. First things first, before we get into the content, I do just want to address the elephant in the room. If you have been following the channel up to date with the videos, you notice there's just been a little bit of a delay. I do apologize, getting back into the swing of things with work, hiring more members for the team, just a very busy time of year for me around work. So I do apologize for being a little less frequent with my content, but here we are, nevertheless, excited to get back into it, and thank you guys for sticking with me. Give the video a thumbs up if you're willing to stick with me. I really would appreciate that. And if this is your first time on the channel, welcome. We have covered so much on the channel. There's plenty more that you can check out in previous seasons, and if you'd consider subscribing, that would be wonderful so you don't miss out. So in the last episode here, we implemented a very simple news feed that just has two items here. This is fueled by the data that we have in Firebase. If you missed it, I'll put a card in the top right. You can go ahead and check that out. But it's very straightforward stuff. We fetch data from the Firebase. We have it all wrapped up in the MVVM architecture, and we eventually bubble it up here where our newsfeed live data, we observe it, and then we call newsfeed_adapter.setItems here on our adapter, our recycler view adapter implementation, and then that is how we get the content on screen here. But you'll notice there's kind of a little bit of like half view binding, half not view binding here, excuse me, data binding here. So we're going to go ahead and convert this over to use data binding, and to do so in a unique way that is making use of the binding adapters. So outside of being able to actually just reference a particular view and set some information to that view based on some little connection here, right? So for instance, if we had a variable here that's a string and we had a text view here, we'd be able to set that string variable somewhere else, and we could say, Android:text equals the name of this variable, and it would just update in the UI. That is like the basic and the most straightforward approach when it comes to data binding, but there is something called binding adapters that we can make use of here. And if we just annotate any function here with the @binding adapter, we can see it's a part of the Android X data binding package. We can go ahead and specify a handful of things. There are plenty of options here for you to enhance this, but we're going to go with a relatively simple approach. But it's a unique way to give certain UI elements more functionality that just doesn't previously exist. So we're going to actually say something here called setItems, because we have a function on our adapter called setItems. And what we're going to go ahead and do is define a function here. It's going to be called setItems. It's actually going to take a recycler view, and then it is also going to take a list of our news feed items that we have defined, and we're going to make that list nullable. You'll see why in a second, but it has to do with the idea that we're using live data. And so basically within this function here that is going to get invoked by the system, we have a recycler view and we have a list of data here. And if we look at what we're doing inside of here when we observe our live data, we have an adapter, we set the items on that adapter, which is a list of newsfeed items right here. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to say the recycler view dot adapter as our newsfeed recycler view adapter, and then from here we're going to actually call set items, and we're going to pass in the list. Now we don't handle a nullable list here, so inside of our adapter class we are just going to allow this to be nullable, and then we are simply going to do empty list in the case where it is null here, just to clean things up. So we're going to clean this up in a little bit, bring it into its own file, but essentially what we've done is we've defined additional attributes really that we can make use of inside of our XML file that we've defined, where we define the layout. So I'm actually going to go ahead and comment this out really quickly, and we're just going to rerun it. I just want to show you that everything works as expected here. There is no errors, nothing should be crashing or anything along those lines. And as the app reruns, it boots up, and of course nothing happens here because we have not we've commented out the code that submits things to the adapter. We've still told the view model to fetch the newsfeed, so all of the data is there. It's inside of the newsfeed live data specifically, but we can now make use of that. So if you remember from a previous episode, we have inside of basically our layout file, we have the parent tag being layout, and then within that we can have the data tag and then the variables that we make use of for data binding. Now on our recycler view, much like if this was a text view and we were trying to set the text, we can actually make use of this view model here, or make use of some variable that we've defined inside of this data tag. And now what we're actually going to do is we're going to type app colon, and then we are going to call the function here. So set items, this previously never existed. You could try in a regular project. These set items is not going to exist. The only reason that it does exist here is because we've actually defined this value here, right? So if we change this to set items 2, and we go back here, yeah, so the IDE didn't necessarily pick it up as far as it being read, but now when we start typing it again, set items 2 is the only viable option, so to speak. So whatever we end up putting inside of these quotations here at the binding adapter annotation is basically the name of the additional feature that we are adding in to this little namespace here within the app. And the wonderful part of that is we can now basically make use of the view model dot newsfeed live data like we would always, or like we would like to with our data binding. And basically what this is going to say is that we're going to set the items that exist inside of our newsfeed live data, and that's coming from the view model. If we bounce back to our activity here, we now see that this function is now invoked, right? It was previously gray, meaning that it wasn't used. Now it is colored in. And then specifically we have on the binding here, the data binding, we set the lifecycle owner to this, which is our activity. We set the view model here, which is this variable that we've defined here, as the view model that we've defined for this activity. And then we just do everything as we normally would. We can actually delete this right here, so we don't actually need to observe anything explicitly. That is happening for us behind the scenes here because we've attached the lifecycle owner and the view model to the data binding instance. Now when we go ahead and rerun it, the system is going to invoke the set items when there is something inside of our live data in the view model. And when we rerun things here, we see that there was nothing there at first because obviously it's loading, and then everything snaps back into place as we would expect. So we've basically hoisted the implementation, or basically what we did previously, the old school way of invoking these set items inside of the observer into this more data binding pattern. So the other thing too is I'm going to go ahead and just cut this out, and then inside of here we are just going to the high level here, and we're going to create a file here called, we'll just call it binding adapters, and then here we're just going to very easily add in the particular adapter here. So you can kind of organize this how you would want. If you want, to maybe make regions here and say recycler view, and then you're going to go ahead and say end region here. So now this little thing appears, and you can kind of collapse it inside of the IDE. If you didn't know that, now you do. Leave a thumbs up if that's the first time you've seen it. And then you can add in, all these other functions here that you, will make use of inside of the recycler view functionality, basically. Or you can have different adapter classes as a whole, or files that will just allow you to, specify in the name, recycler view binding adapters, string binding adapters, text view binding, whatever the case is. And however you want to organize it is fine. But point is that you can make use of this binding adapter functionality to more or less add additional functions to your project here, and specifically, additional features to your XML that you've defined. So if we rerun it again, just showing you that it does work. You can have things in different files. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have it in the same file. But this is a little bit of a brute force, way, so to speak, in the sense that, like, yes, this is called set items in the layout, but you don't really, it's kind of tethered not to the recycler view, but in this case, it's more so tethered to really the adapter. We can try to clean that up, or maybe make this more explicit, or maybe there's a better way, and I'm just not certain of it. But point is that this binding adapter is a new way to add functionality. The last little bit here that I want to add in is that inside of our adapter here, we do have a onBind inside here, inside of our particular view holder, and we are not really making use of the data binding instance at this very moment. Right now we're actually making use of view binding, but we're not making use of data binding, so we can very easily uplift this particular layout here to actually make use of the data binding. So if you've missed it before, this is basically what we end up doing. We just copy and paste this entire layout file that you traditionally have inside of this layout tag. Just going to go ahead and clean that up real quick, get things formatted. Let's close that for the sake of space here, and we're just going to add these little bits in here. So great, now everything seems to be working just fine. And then at the bottom here, it seems that's where it likes to put things. We add in a data tag, and then specifically in here, we are going to add in a variable, and the name is going to be, let's see, we have the title text view here, we have a description text view, so we can make these pretty obvious here. We're going to say title, which is of type string, and then we are going to do the exact same thing, and we are going to make it description here. So once we have this data here, these two variables set up, we can very easily inside of our text views here just make use of the standard way of communicating the text to the text view element here. So we can simply just write Android:text, and then we're going to make use of what exists here, which is the title inside of our layout file here, and then we are also just going to do the same thing here, but for description. Right, and so this is the basic, this is the simple way of using the view binding, the data binding, where you're basically applying it to an attribute that already exists, right? Android text is the way that you communicate the text to the text view, but obviously the app::set items is something that doesn't necessarily exist on any particular recycler view implementation here. One thing that I have noticed is I do believe, and someone correct me if I'm wrong inside of the comment section, is that when you create your own binding adapters and you actually define essentially more functionality, it exists in the app namespace. You're not going to find it inside of the Android set items. It's instead going to be in the app::set items. So just be aware of that if you are building out your own adapters, and maybe I'm not 100% correct on that. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I found so far. Then here we have not touched the actual implementation here of this view holder, but we have this basic implementation of view binding. Excuse me, sorry, I keep getting these mixed up. Where we reference our binding, then the particular title text view or the description text view, calling text, and setting that attribute to be some particular value. But instead, what we can do here is we can actually say binding.title equals the newsfeed item.title, and then if we simply go ahead and update this as well to just say description here for binding.description equals newsfeed item.description, we can actually get rid of the explicit calls here to setting the text. Now in this case, it doesn't actually seem like we're really adding too much functionality or reducing some overhead or something along those lines. It's more or less the same code that you have to write, but just showing you the way of being able to communicate via data binding. And so if we hover over and command click in, we see that we're actually accessing these variables that we've defined here inside of our layout. So pretty standard stuff over the past few episodes, but if this is the first time you're seeing it, this is how data binding works in, I guess, the more traditional sense. And then if we just go ahead and rerun things here, we will see that the lists are going to be bound, or the items are going to be bound to the list, and then the particular elements are going to be bound as well, or the data is going to be bound. So we can see that it kind of loads in. Sorry for its stuttering, that's just the emulator running on my computer, but it's the exact same functionality, right? Under the hood, under the hood it's different, but to the user it's the exact same experience, and I guess that's all that matters at the end of the day. So more or less the same way of doing things here, just a different way to accomplish it and to be more so in the data binding pattern here. So if this was interesting to you, please give the video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. If this is your first time on the channel, I'd really appreciate a subscription, or even if you just are not subscribed and you have been kind of lurking in the shadows, I would appreciate the subscription. It'll help me and the channel grow as we approach the 1,000 mark, and it will just help others find the content as well that I've been putting out. So here's a pretty solid example of data binding, making use of the adapters, and then just the traditional way as well of defining variables. And so that'll do it for this episode. I think in the next episode here, we're going to go ahead and continue building out basically the data behind the scenes here. Maybe we'll modify the UI to reflect that as well, but we're going to make this something a bit more interesting, a bit more interactive than just two elements on the screen here. So stick with me. I hope to see you there. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks.